Hi, I'm Jen Moore, Program Annotator for Music of the Baroque, and welcome to the 24-25 season's penultimate installment of Baroque Notes. Mozart and His Mentors is all about musical friendship, the people who helped shape Mozart's voice, the rich creative community that surrounded him as he came of age, and even the friendship between our music director, Dame Jane Glover, and our world-renowned soloist, pianist Imogen Cooper. When Imogen was last with us in 2017, Jane discussed why the two love to perform together.
Imogen I've known for many years, pretty much all my performing life. We're the same age, and so although she started much earlier than I did, being a child prodigy, which I certainly was not, our careers have sort of interacted over the decades. You know, we're very close friends anyway, and making high quality music with your best friends is sort of one of the best experiences. And what I love about her playing, and what certainly all the orchestra love about her playing, is that sort of that there's something wonderfully robust about it when it needs to be robust, but there's also unbelievable delicacy. Her touch and her sound are matchless in my book. Nobody can get quite as much singing quality out of a piano that she can, and the variety. And the joy and the depth. I mean, she can bring absolutely everything out of a Mozart piano concerto as she can out of a Schubert sonata.
Now, in our modern world, we often hear how disconnected we've become, screen-bound, scattered, sometimes starved for real human connection. The writer and director Alan Ball put it this way: "We live in a time where there's an alienation factor. There's a certain disconnection. We don't have any real sense of community anymore." But in the 18th century, with no form of electronic communication, community was everything, especially in music. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart didn't grow up in isolation. He traveled with his family. He learned from others. He met people who were further along in their careers. He soaked in what he could and left what he detested behind, pretty famously. On his travels to Italy with his father Leopold in the 1770s, Mozart met two composers who left a lasting impression: Josef Mysliveček and Johann Adolph Hasse. These weren't just professional acquaintances, they were real influences, and in the case of Mysliveček in particular, a real friend. Let's start with Mysliveček, a Czech composer whose operas were hugely popular in Italy. Italian audiences couldn't pronounce his name. And honestly, it has not been easy for me to say it over and over again. So they gave him a nickname, Il Divino Boemo, the Divine Bohemian. Mysliveček wasn't born into music. He grew up in Prague, the son of a miller, and actually entered the family business as a teenager. But he couldn't let go of his love for music. So when his father died, he handed the business off to his brother and became a church violinist. Within a year, he had moved to Venice to learn the art of composing opera. By 1767, he was having hits in Naples and was well on his way. He and Mozart met during Wolfgang's teenage travels, and they hit it off. Mysliveček is actually mentioned 40 times in Mozart's letters. Mozart described him as full of fire, spirit, and life, and called him a prize difficult to replace. But their story has a darker side. Leopold Mozart helped Mysliveček get commissions in Salzburg, and in return, Mysliveček promised an opera commission for Wolfgang in Naples. He failed to deliver on his end of the bargain, however, and the result was a falling out between him and Mozart's father that never quite healed. Unfortunately, Mysliveček also had a passion for life's pleasures, which led to some trouble. He contracted a sexually transmitted disease, which was probably syphilis, that disfigured his face quite dramatically. And in one of the more disturbing details in Mozart's letters, he described how a surgeon tried to remove the facial growths on Mysliveček's face and ended up cutting off his entire nose. And yet Mozart still saw the man he knew. He wrote, "If it were not for his face, he would be the same old Mysliveček, the same excellent, cheerful fellow." Mysliveček's health declined, and so did his career. He died in poverty in Rome in 1781, but not entirely alone. An English friend named Barry buried him in San Lorenzo di Lucina, and a monument was erected in his memory. If Mysliveček's name sounds familiar to you, Perhaps you saw the 2022 movie Il Bohemo, directed by Peter Vaclav, who also made a documentary about the composer in 2016. Il Bohemo was the Czech Republic's submission to the 95th Academy Awards for the Best International Feature Film, though it was not nominated. Also interesting, it cost $5 million to make, and it grossed about $500,000. In this scene, Mysliveček meets the young Mozart. Mysliveček was 33, Mozart was 14 in reality, though in the scene I'm about to show, Mozart seems a bit younger to me than that.
Maestro, potete farmi sentire qualcosa che state scrivendo?
Certo. L'inizio di un'opera deve essere sempre semplice e brillante. Io faccio pure la triade in re maggiore. Spartito nella borsa, un attimo.
Bravo. Das ist frisch, molto vivace.
Danke.
Bravo. Bravo, molto bello.
By the time we get to Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 13, things have changed. It's 1782, and Mozart is no longer the prodigy touring with his father. He's a working composer in Vienna trying something bold, life as a freelancer. Most composers still held court positions or were employed by the church, but Mozart wanted more freedom. It's not unlike the path Mysliveček had taken years earlier in Italy, trying to make a living on one's own terms. This concerto was part of the very first public concert series Mozart organized in Vienna, his musical calling card of sorts. He wrote to his father that he was aiming for a balance, quote, a happy medium between what is too easy and too difficult, end quote, something that would engage connoisseurs and charm casual listeners. He even arranged a version for piano and string quartet, so it could be performed not just in the concert hall, but in more intimate spaces, living rooms, salons, private homes. Mozart was thinking practically, but also personally about how to connect. Musically, the concerto opens with flair, bright, full of confidence, with trumpets and timpani. Of course, not in the string quartet version. Let's listen to a little bit of the opening movement. Now we step back a generation with Johann Adolph Hasse, who is enjoying the golden age of his career when he and Mozart met. Hasse had started as a singer, but it was as a composer that he made his mark, and he had quite a life. He married the famous soprano Faustina Bordoni, worked with the great poet librettist Metastasio, and met composers like Johann Sebastian Bach along the way. By the mid-1700s, Hasse was one of the great masters of opera seria, most simply opera that was serious or not comic. His music was admired for its grace, its directness, and its emotional clarity. In his book, The Critical Musician, Hasse's contemporary, Johann Adolph Scheibe, called the composer somebody who brought music to its highest point. He has shown us the beauty of good taste in such a way that we can clearly recognize in his works he has truly reached the ultimate goal that was the object of all endeavors of his predecessors, to follow nature, to imitate it. I'd like to note that Scheibe was not a fan of Bach's music, which he thought was too complicated. It was a clarity of Hasse's music that was appealing to him and ultimately pointed the way, along with composers like Telemann, to Mozart and Haydn. The symphony in G minor, written in the mid-1740s, illustrates Scheibe's point. At the same time that Bach was composing the Art of the Fugue, Hasse was writing this work that has been compared to early Mozart. The key of G minor imbues the work with a sense of urgency and tension, as you can hear from the very start. And finally, we come to Mozart's Paris Symphony, written in 1778 during a deeply emotional chapter of his life. Mozart was in Mannheim, and he was in love, thinking about staying, but his father pushed him to go to Paris to make a name for himself. And so Mozart went, bringing his mother with him. He was commissioned to write a symphony for the Concert Spirituel, a major public concert series, and he knew exactly how to impress a Parisian audience. He expanded the orchestra, added trumpets and timpani, and made sure to include the premier coup d'archet, a dramatic unified opening gesture the French adored. And in a letter to his father, Mozart laughed about it, and these are not my words. "What a fuss these donkeys make over it. I don't see any difference. They begin together as they do in other places. It's ridiculous." Still, he gave them what they wanted and more. At the premiere, the audience was electrified, according to Mozart's letter to his father. His description of the final movement is particularly vivid. "Since I had heard that all the final allegros here begin just like the first one, with all the instruments playing at once and generally unisono, I begin with only the first and second violins playing very softly for the first 8 measures, and a loud forte immediately afterwards. Just as I expected, when they heard the soft beginning, the audience went, 'Shh.' Then came the forte. For them, hearing the forte and clapping their hands were practically the same thing. I was so happy that as soon as the symphony was over, I went off to the Palais Royal, where I had a large ice, said the rosary as I had vowed to do, and went home." Sadly, Mozart's joy was cut short. Just days later, his mother, who was still traveling with him, passed away. That heartbreaking moment adds an extra layer of poignancy to an otherwise triumphant moment in the composer's career. As he wrote in a letter to a trusted friend in Salzburg, "This has been the saddest day of my life. Please watch over my father for him and try to give him courage." The music on this concert is a portrait of influence, of connection, and of how art is passed from one hand to the next. Hasse taught a generation how to write with elegance. Mysliveček brought fire and flair, and like the scene in the movie, Mozart soaked it all in, took it to the next level, and lit the way for everyone who came after. Because even the greatest composers still need mentors and people who believe in them. As Paul McCartney and John Lennon put it so memorably, we get by with a little help from our friends. And I hope my words gave you a little help as you enjoy Mozart and his mentors on April 6th at the North Shore Center in Skokie, April 7th at the Harris Theater in downtown Chicago, and on demand from April 11th through May 11th. Thank you so much.